J. Cole fans just got demolished. The internet is watching a full-scale meltdown in real time because Kendrick Lamar didn't just win the GOAT debate, he ended it. People are saying Cole's entire prime at 40 argument just collapsed under the weight of documented history. This whole situation has hip-hop spinning. Everybody thought they knew how this debate worked. J. Cole drops quality music, builds a loyal fan base, and eventually his consistency would speak for itself. That was the narrative. Cole fans flooding every comment section, every social media thread, screaming about how their guy finally hit his stride at 40 years old, how he's entering his prime, how the best is yet to come. That was the version everyone kept repeating. But then something happened that nobody expected. The internet didn't just push back, it brought receipts, hard evidence, undeniable facts, academic recognition, industry numbers, cultural impact measurements, and suddenly the whole narrative started twisting. Because while Cole's supporters were celebrating a promise of future possibility, Kendrick Lamar was casually sitting on a mountain of completed history. And that history, it's not up for debate anymore. It's archived, documented, taught in universities. The conversation shifted from opinion to brutal, unforgiving reality. Let me break down exactly what happened here, because this is where things get dangerously embarrassing for the Cole camp. The facts started rolling in like an avalanche, and folks online turned into full-blown investigators, pulling up every metric, every award, every milestone, every piece of documented evidence that could settle this once and for all. They weren't playing around. They started comparing album sales, critical reception, cultural impact, touring numbers, industry recognition, academic preservation, literally everything. And here's what they found. By the time Kendrick Lamar turned 30 years old, he had already dropped Good Kid, M.A.A.D. City, a generational classic that redefined concept albums in hip-hop. He had already released To Pimp a Butterfly, an album so culturally significant that universities started teaching courses about it. He had already given the world Damn, which won him a Pulitzer Prize, the first hip-hop artist in history to receive that honor. Think about that. The Pulitzer Prize, an award that had been reserved for classical composers and jazz legends. Kendrick shattered that ceiling before he even hit 31. Meanwhile, J. Cole at 30 had one uncontested classic, maybe two if you're being generous, and a fan base already moving the goalposts, already talking about wait for the next one. But it gets even crazier when you realize the timeline advantage Cole actually had. Because here's the part that makes this whole situation brutal. J. Cole is older than Kendrick. He came first. He got signed to Roc Nation first. He had the Jay-Z co-sign first. He dropped his debut album first. He had every single advantage imaginable. The industry machine was fully armed and ready to push him to superstar. And yet, Kendrick still lapped him, repeatedly, ruthlessly, publicly. Online detectives started pulling up the exact numbers, and folks swear this is where the argument completely falls apart. Kendrick treated his 20s like a Hall of Fame speed run. Every album was an event, every release shifted the culture, every project added another layer to his legacy. He wasn't just making music, he was building a monument in real time. Cole treated his entire career like a closing argument, always promising the big moment was coming, always asking for patience, always building towards something that never quite materialized at the level his fans claimed it would. And now we're in 2025. Cole is talking about retirement, hyping up a final album like it's a last Hail Mary, and his fans are calling that a prime that hasn't even dropped yet, a prime based on hope and speculation rather than completed work. Meanwhile, Kendrick disappears for 5 years, comes back, breaks touring records, detonates streaming charts, drops one diss song that sends the entire industry into cardiac arrest and reminds everyone exactly who runs this genre. The evidence kept stacking. Fans started comparing awards. Kendrick, 17 Grammy wins, multiple Album of the Year nominations, Pulitzer Prize, BET Awards, MTV Awards, critical acclaim across every major publication. J. Cole, sure, strong numbers, respected artist, absolutely, but when you line them up side by side, it's not even close. Then they started looking at cultural impact. Kendrick's lyrics are studied in college courses at Harvard, Yale, and dozens of other institutions. His albums are preserved in the Library of Congress. His influence shaped an entire generation of artists. His name is mentioned alongside Nas, Rakim, and the all-time greats. Cole's work is defended in comment sections, with emotion, with hope, with just wait. This isn't competition. This is efficiency versus desperation. One man works less and achieves more, the other works non-stop and still needs defending. One artist's legacy is already sealed, archived, and taught. The other artist's legacy is still being argued about by fans who keep moving the finish line every time their guy doesn't quite reach it. And here's the kicker, the part that really makes this whole prime at 40 argument collapse. Kendrick's worst album is still considered better than most artists' best work. His supposed off years are still more impactful than Cole's peak moments. That's not hate, that's not bias, that's documented, measurable, verifiable reality. The internet broke it down frame by frame, album by album, year by year, and every single time the conclusion was the same. Kendrick didn't just win, he dominated so thoroughly that the debate itself became embarrassing to even have. Now let's get into the motive behind this whole prime at 40 narrative, because this is where everything starts clicking into place. And honestly, when you understand the backstory, you realize this isn't just about music. This is about desperation. This is about legacy panic. This is about fans watching their hero's window close in real time. J. Cole came into the game with everything. Rock Nation backing, Jay-Z mentorship, industry connections that most artists would kill for, a debut album that went platinum, critical praise, commercial success. The blueprint for superstardom was laid out perfectly. All he had to do was execute. And for a while, it looked like he would. Born Center dropped and people were calling him the chosen one. 2014 Forest Hills Drive went platinum with no features, and the Cole fans were loud. They were everywhere, proclaiming him as the savior of real hip-hop, the one who would carry the torch. But then something happened. Or rather, something didn't happen. That next level never quite arrived. That album that would undeniably cement him as the greatest never materialized. Every release was solid, every project was respectable, but that transcendent moment, that culture-shifting, generation-defining, undeniable masterpiece, it never came. Meanwhile, Kendrick was dropping Good Kid, Mad City, then To Pimp a Butterfly, then Damn, each one bigger than the last, each one more critically acclaimed, each one adding another brick to a legacy that was becoming untouchable. And Cole's fans started to panic. You could see it happening in real time. The goalposts started moving. First it was wait for the next album. Then it was he's the most consistent. Then it was he doesn't need awards to prove his greatness. Then it was his time is coming. And now it's he's entering his prime at 40. Think about that progression. That's not confidence. That's not celebration. That's damage control. That's a fan base watching their guys' prime years slip away and desperately trying to rewrite the timeline to make it seem like the best is still ahead. But here's the brutal truth. Cole didn't come late. He came first. He's older than Kendrick. He had more time, more resources, more industry support, and he still got lapped. That kind of fall off hits different when you realize it's not about potential anymore. It's about results. And the results are already in. Industry insiders started talking, quietly at first, then more louder. Executives reportedly admitting that Kendrick's catalog is already considered historically closed, meaning nothing Cole drops now can rewrite the comparison. The conversation is over. The verdict is in. One legacy is complete, the other is still being defended with hypotheticals. And it gets worse for Cole when you look at the trajectory. Kendrick's career arc is perfect. Early mixtapes building buzz, debut album that establishes him as a force, second album that proves it wasn't a fluke, third album that cements legendary status, fourth album that wins a Pulitzer and breaks every ceiling imaginable, then a strategic disappearance that only made his return more impactful. Cole's trajectory is different. Strong start, solid middle, and now a late career push that feels less like a victory lap and more like a last chance. His fans aren't celebrating dominance, they're hoping for vindication. They're not pointing to completed work, they're promising future greatness. That's the difference. One fan base is holding trophies, the other is holding hope. And let's talk about the Prime at 40 claim specifically, because this is where the argument completely falls apart. A prime implies you're at your best, your absolute best, the height of your powers. But how can you call something a prime when it hasn't even happened yet? How can you claim someone is in their prime based on an album that isn't even out? That's not a prime, that's a prayer. Meanwhile, Kendrick's actual prime is already documented, already archived, already studied. His 20s were a masterclass in artistic excellence. His 30s have been a masterclass in strategic dominance. He doesn't need to promise greatness. He's already delivered it multiple times at the highest possible level. Critics started weighing in too. Privately at first, then more publicly. One music journalist allegedly said, Cole's upcoming album is being framed as career salvage, not domination. Another source bluntly stated, Kendrick isn't in the GOAT conversation anymore. He ended it. That's not hate. That's not bias. That's industry consensus. That's the people who covered this music professionally, who analyze it for a living, who understand the historical context, all coming to the same conclusion. And here's what makes this whole situation even more devastating for Cole's fans. It's not that Cole is bad. It's not that his music doesn't matter. It's that he's being compared to someone who operated on a completely different level. Someone who turned hip-hop into high art. Someone who won awards that hip-hop artists weren't supposed to win. Someone who influenced culture beyond music. Cole makes great rap albums. Kendrick makes history. That's the gap, and no amount of a wait for the next one can close it. But here's the part that really hits different. This isn't just about numbers and awards. This is about dreams dying in real time. This is about watching a fan base realize that the hero they've been defending for over a decade might never reach the mountaintop they promised he would. Think about the Cole fans who've been riding since the warm-up days, the ones who believed with everything they had that their guy would eventually be recognized as the greatest. The ones who defended him through every debate, every comparison, every criticism. The ones who genuinely believed the narrative that consistency and longevity would eventually win out over flash and hype. And now they're watching that belief system crumble. Not because Cole did anything wrong, but because reality doesn't care about loyalty. Reality doesn't care about how much you want something to be true. Reality is cold, unforgiving, documented. You can see it in the comments sections, the desperation, the moving goalposts, the increasingly elaborate arguments trying to explain why awards don't matter, why critical acclaim is overrated, why commercial success isn't the real measure of greatness. That's not confidence, that's grief. That's the sound of people watching their narrative collapse and scrambling to build a new one before it's too late. And the saddest part? Cole himself seems to know. He's talking about retirement, about this being his final album, about going out on his own terms. That's not the language of someone entering their prime. That's the language of someone who knows the window has closed, someone who's making peace with what his legacy will actually be, rather than what it was supposed to be. Meanwhile, Kendrick is out here breaking records without even trying, disappearing for years and coming back stronger, operating with the confidence of someone who knows the debate is already over. He doesn't need to defend his position. He doesn't need to promise future greatness. He just exists at the top and lets the work speak for itself. That contrast is brutal. One artist is fighting to stay in the conversation. The other is so far above it that he barely needs to participate. And for the fans who invested years of emotional energy into defending Cole, who built their entire hip-hop identity around the belief that he was the chosen one, this isn't just losing a debate. This is watching a decade of investment become irrelevant. This is realizing that history won't remember it the way they hoped. This is coming to terms with the fact that sometimes the good guy doesn't win. Sometimes talent and work ethic aren't enough. Sometimes you can do everything right and still come in second. That's the emotional weight of this whole situation. Not just that Kendrick won, but that Cole's fans have to accept that no amount of hoping, defending, or moving goalposts will change the final verdict. The history books are already being written, and they're not waiting for one more album to make their decision. Let's dig even deeper into the evidence, because the more you look, the worse it gets for the prime at 40 argument. And I'm talking about hard data here. Numbers that can't be argued with. Recognition that can't be dismissed. Academic institutions have reportedly requested Kendrick's handwritten lyrics for preservation. Universities are teaching entire courses on his albums. The Library of Congress has archived his work as culturally significant. That's not fan-base hype, that's institutional recognition. That's the kind of validation that happens once in a generation. Meanwhile, Cole's work remains absent from major cultural archives. Not because it's bad, but because it doesn't carry that same historical weight. It doesn't reshape the culture in the same way. It doesn't force institutions to rewrite their understanding of what hip-hop can be. And let's talk about the Pulitzer Prize for a second, because this is the moment that should have ended all debates forever. When Kendrick won that award in 2018 for Damn, it wasn't just a win for him. It was a validation of hip-hop as high art. It was the establishment saying, this matters beyond entertainment. It was history being made. And what was Cole doing in 2018? Dropping KOD. A solid album, a thoughtful project, but nothing that shifted the culture. Nothing that made institutions reconsider their entire framework. Nothing that will be remembered as a defining moment in hip-hop history. That's the gap. One artist creates moments that transcend music. The other creates music that his fans love, but the broader culture doesn't prioritize. Fans online started pulling up touring numbers, and the difference is staggering. Kendrick's Big Steppers tour reportedly grossed over $110 million. His shows were selling out arenas in minutes. He was breaking venue records, creating experiences that fans called once in a lifetime. Cole's tours are successful too, but they're not breaking records. They're not creating that same level of cultural frenzy. They're solid, respectable, but not legendary. And here's where the evidence gets even more damning. Streaming numbers. Kendrick disappears for 5 years and comes back with Not Like Us, which demolishes streaming records. Over 900 million streams in months, becomes a cultural phenomenon, gets played at actual NBA games, becomes a genuine moment in music history. Cole drops music consistently, and it does well, but it doesn't create those kinds of moments. It doesn't break the internet. It doesn't dominate conversations for months. It exists in the discourse and then fades. Critics started compiling lists of the greatest hip-hop albums of all time. Every major publication, Rolling Stone, Complex, Pitchfork, The New York Times, and the pattern was consistent. Kendrick had multiple albums in the top 20, sometimes multiple albums in the top 10. Good Kid, M.A.A.D. City regularly appears in the top 5. To Pimp a Butterfly is often called the greatest hip-hop album of the 2010s. Cole's albums appear on these lists too, but lower. Forest Hills Drive makes it sometimes, but it's never in that top tier. It's never in that change the entire game category. And let's talk about influence, because this is where the gap becomes almost comical. How many artists cite Kendrick as their primary influence? How many up-and-coming rappers are trying to replicate his artistic ambition? How many producers are chasing that Kendrick sound? The answer is basically everyone. Kendrick's influence on the current generation of hip-hop is undeniable. He set a new standard for what rap albums could be. He proved that you could be artistic and commercially successful. He showed that concept albums could work in the streaming era. Cole's influence is there, but it's not reshaping the genre. It's not creating new lanes. It's not forcing artists to level up their craft. It's respected, but it's not revolutionary. And online detectives even started comparing their features and collaborations. And guess what? Kendrick's guest verses are events. When he shows up on someone else's track, it becomes a moment. His verse on Control literally changed the trajectory of hip-hop for years. His features with SZA and Future and others consistently become the most talked about parts of those projects. Cole's features are solid, but they're not creating those kinds of seismic shifts. They're not becoming legendary moments to get discussed for years. And here's the most brutal evidence of all. When hip-hop historians talk about the 2010s and 2020s, who do they center the conversation around? Who do they point to as the defining artist of this era? Who do they credit with pushing the genre forward? It's Kendrick, every single time. Not because of bias, not because of hype, but because the evidence is overwhelming. The body of work is undeniable. The impact is measurable. Cole gets mentioned, he gets respect, but he's not the main character of this story. He's a supporting player in someone else's legacy. And that's the truth that his fans are struggling to accept. Now, this whole situation gets even crazier when you realize how the media has been handling this debate. Because there's allegedly been a coordinated effort to keep the Cole versus Kendrick narrative alive, even when the evidence clearly shows it's not a real competition anymore. Industry insiders say that media outlets are desperate for balance. They want the debate to continue because it drives clicks, generates engagement, creates content. If they admit that Kendrick has already won decisively, then what's left to talk about? So they keep pushing the "it's close" narrative even when the facts don't support it. Think about how many articles you've seen with titles like "Is J. Cole finally getting his respect?" or "Why J. Cole might be more important than Kendrick Lamar." Those aren't based on evidence. Those are based on the need to create controversy where none actually exists. One music journalist reportedly admitted off the record that their editor pushed them to write a piece defending Cole's legacy specifically because the pro-Kendrick takes were dominating the discourse. Not because the editor believed Cole was actually on Kendrick's level, but because they needed content that would generate debate and drive traffic. That's the game. That's how the media manipulates perception. They create false equivalencies to keep conversations going. They platform minority opinions as if they're equally valid. They frame one-sided victories as close competitions. And Cole's fans have bought into it completely. They've internalized these manufactured narratives. They genuinely believe that the debate is still open, that the verdict isn't in yet, that their guy still has a chance to prove himself as the greatest. But behind closed doors, industry executives reportedly admit that Kendrick's legacy is already sealed, that nothing Cole does at this point will change the historical record, that the comparison isn't even being made anymore at the highest levels of the music business. There's also the factor of how different their approaches have been. Kendrick operates like a calculated strategist. Every move is intentional. Every release is an event. He disappears for years and comes back with maximum impact. He doesn't oversaturate. He doesn't chase trends. He just drops masterpieces and lets them speak. Cole operates like someone trying to prove something. Constantly releasing, constantly engaging, constantly trying to stay in the conversation. And there's nothing wrong with that approach, but it creates a different kind of legacy. One built on volume rather than impact, on consistency rather than transcendence. And here's a side story that perfectly illustrates the difference. When Kendrick dropped the Heart Pot 5 before Mr. Morale, the video featured deepfake technology that made him look like various black icons. The artistic ambition alone was stunning. The cultural commentary was profound. It became a moment in music video history. When Cole drops visuals, they're well-made, professional, but they're not creating those kinds of cultural conversations. They're not taking artistic risks that force people to reconsider what's possible. That's been the pattern throughout both their careers. Kendrick takes risks and they pay off. Cole plays it safer and it works fine. But fine doesn't build legendary status. Fine doesn't get you into the GOAT conversation. Fine gets you respect and a solid career. But it doesn't get you immortality. What we're seeing here is bigger than just two artists. This is about how we measure greatness in real time. This is about the difference between potential and actualization. This is about understanding that sometimes the debate is over even when one side refuses to accept it. The bigger conversation is about legacy building in the streaming era. How do you create work that lasts? How do you ensure that your music matters beyond the moment? How do you build something that gets studied and preserved rather than just consumed and forgotten? Kendrick figured that out. He understood that in an age of infinite content, you need to create work that demands attention, that forces engagement, that can't be ignored or dismissed. He built his legacy intentionally, strategically, brilliantly. Cole took a different path. And again, there's nothing wrong with that path, but the results speak for themselves. One approach created a legacy that's already complete and untouchable. The other created a career that's still being debated and defended. And this is a warning for any artist watching. Consistency isn't enough. Work ethic isn't enough. Talent isn't enough. You need moments. You need cultural impact. You need to create work that transcends the music itself. The responsibility falls on artists to understand that their window is limited, that prime years don't last forever, that you can't keep promising the next one will be the masterpiece. At some point, you either deliver or you don't, and the culture moves on either way. What we're witnessing with this whole prime at 40 narrative is what happens when fans can't let go, when they can't accept that their hero's moment has passed, when they keep moving goalposts because accepting reality is too painful. But reality doesn't care about feelings. Reality is documented, archived, preserved. And reality says that this debate ended years ago. We're just watching one side refuse to accept it. So where does this leave us? With one artist whose legacy is already complete and another whose fans are still hoping for vindication that will never come. With a debate that was never really a debate in the first place, with documented evidence that one career operated on a completely different level than the other. The speculation now is what happens when Cole's final album drops. Will it change anything? Can it change anything? Or is this just the last chapter in a story whose ending was already written? Industry insiders say no, that nothing Cole releases at this point can rewrite the historical record, that Kendrick's legacy is too complete, too documented, too preserved to be challenged by one more album. And honestly, that's probably the truth. This isn't about potential anymore, it's about completed work. And one artist's completed work is already in museums while the other's is still being defended in comment sections. The verdict is in. The debate is over. What we're watching now is just the aftermath. This story is far from over. More reactions dropping daily, more evidence surfacing, more fans melting down as reality sets in. Drop your thoughts below. Do you think Cole's final album can change the narrative? And do you think Kendrick's legacy is already untouchable? Like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications because we're covering every twist. Stay locked in.